I can't believe I bought another vintage guitar amp. But when one of these shows up at your local pawn shop, you don't let it get away. This is a 1950s Gibson GA-50T amplifier. It is the classic jazz amp of the 1950s. This model, or its non-tremolo variant, was played by a host of jazz greats, including Jim Hall, until he got his polytone in the 1970s, Jimmy Raney, and Barney Kessel, among others, I'm sure. More than any other amp, the GA-50 sort of established that classic jazz guitar tone of the 1950s. Usually when combined with a P90 or a Charlie Christian pickup. This particular amp is obviously not collector grade. I bought it to play. I'm not sure of the actual date yet. I haven't had the chassis out, but we'll do that, and we'll have to see if we can find a date code somewhere. But it would be somewhere between 1948 and 1955, probably early 50s. But before we have a tour of this amp, let's give it a listen. First thing we notice is that the handle has been replaced, but that's fine. This is a nice one anyhow. It looks like it is a reissue of a Fender handle from the Tweed era. And although I thought this was a Gibson amp, it turns out it's a Gibbs amp. Probably some kind of a Chinese knockoff. Actually, it looks like that label, I don't know if it's wearing off or has been painted over, whether something's been done to this case. I'm not convinced that this grill cloth is the original because the pattern looks a little bit different from what I've seen online. And it looks like someone has added these little rubber bumpers. I'm guessing maybe for a snugger fit in a road case or something. I don't know. We'll have to take a look at that and see how those are attached and see whether we can get them off easily without causing any further damage. Let's see, anything else we can see? Case is not too bad. I mean, obviously there's some wear on the toe legs. Well, let's flip it over and see what's on the back. So we have the original tremolo foot switch, which is nice. This is hardwired into the chassis with a very, very long cable. And there is a little holder that's been attached to the side of the amp that I think originally would have been on the black back plate. We're missing the back plate on this amp. Let's see, what else can we say? Well, obviously, the two speakers, 12-inch and 8-inch, have been replaced with modern Jensens. I do have the original speakers, but they have to be reconed. After 70 years, that's not surprising. So we'll think about whether we want to do that. Looks like the power transformer may have been replaced. If so, that's definitely replaced, and that's a very good transformer though, so that's okay. The output transformer might be original, although I think originally it would have been mounted on a speaker. So somebody may have moved that to the chassis. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tubes. 5V4 rectifier, a couple of 6SJ7 preamp tubes, a 6SL7 for the tremolo, and then a third 6SJ7 as a sort of post-tremolo boost, and a 6SN7 phase inverter. So most of the tubes here look like they are modern-ish. Some of them may be new old stock. That might be new old stock back there. And of course the filter capacitor has been replaced, as we would expect. It's a very quiet amp, and we'll see why in a minute. Let's take a look at the schematic, and I'll show you why this is such a quiet amp. Oh, and here we see 3 instrument inputs and a microphone input. Okay, so let's take a look at the schematic. And the first thing we see that's quite interesting coming out of the power transformers, we have 2 chokes, not 1, but 2. So that's filtering that power, and we have, in addition, we have, of course, our power supply filter caps here, 20 microfarad, 10 microfarad, 10 microfarad, 40 microfarad, 10 microfarad over here. So we have quite a bit of filtering going on. One of the reasons perhaps why this amp, despite being an early amp, is very quiet. So there's our mic input here with a 1 meg grid stopper resistor, and our 3 input jacks for the instruments. And we have our preamp tubes, and down here is the tremolo circuit using a 6SL7 tube, 2 halves of it, and with our intensity and frequency knobs gained rather. And there's our foot switch right down here. So the signal after that comes up to goes through here. The mic signal is going through here through our tone stack, and then you have the volume potentiometers after that going into the phase inverter and off to the power tubes and to the 2 speakers. As simple as that. And here is the chassis of the GA-50T. And this is kind of like grandfather's hammer, where you've replaced the head twice and the handle 3 times, because all of the cathode bypass caps, all of the signal caps, in addition to, as we'd expect, all of the filter caps have been replaced. So it's no wonder that this amp sounds so clean and almost anemic's the wrong word, but extremely clean. And that's because all of these caps have been replaced. So these really probably had no choice, because these would have been the old paper wax capacitors, and they would be long past their active life. So it's interesting to see here, this is telling us that at least this Sprague Atom was installed on March 2004. So that's probably the last time the amp was serviced, so 20 years ago. Time to take another look at those capacitors. Interesting, we do have date codes on the filters, on the output transformer, and on the transformer below as well. And if I'm interpreting them correctly, that is the 17th week of 1951. And that is the 20th week of 1951. And the one on the other side is the 25th week of 1951. So we know this is kind of like mid-1951, it looks like. So that makes sense. 1951 was the year in which the most was had the highest production run of this model. I think there was 300 and some in that year. And it's great that they kept the old cap visible on the other side, the old multi-cap can, but they just cut off the leads here. Okay, well, there you go. I don't know what else there is to learn from this, but let's put it all back together, and that is that.